everyone. I'm Carol Ortenberg, and today I'm chatting with Josh Tetrick, the co-founder and CEO of Eat Just. Josh, thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Hey, Carol, good to be with you.
So to start, let's look back. How has the Just brand evolved over the years as you've scaled the company?
Probably the biggest evolution is focusing on Just Egg. So Just Egg has become the fastest growing egg brand in the United States. And we had to figure out a way to build a brand around something that people weren't used to, which is an egg, not from chickens, but an egg from plants. And that was a challenge. We had to think about how we communicate what the differences between a plant-based egg and a chicken egg are, but do it in a way that isn't overly critical of a chicken egg. Because if all you're talking about is negative things, then people aren't hearing the positive things. So we started off in retail and with some work on digital channels, focused really on sustainability and animal welfare. And we've since evolved to focus a whole lot more on taste and health.
Well, I think we're going to break down a lot of the nuances of taste versus health versus mission. But to start, how have you incorporated your mission and your brand values into the brand? And how has that helped the company be unified in its really massive goals of disrupting the food system?
So our mission is building a food system where we can eat all the meat and all the eggs we want without needing to slaughter a single animal, without needing to tear down a single tree, without needing to use antibiotics. And it needs to taste really good. So that's what we're trying to do. And we do that by finding an egg, making an egg from a plant, and we call that Just Egg. And also making real meat without slaughtering an animal, and we call that good meat. So everything really starts with this mission of how do we get to this world as quickly as we possibly can, because the current world's not sustainable. And we have to balance why I am doing this, which is entirely driven by the mission of health and sustainability and causing less harm, with what consumers are wanting every single day when they wake up in the morning, which is, I want a good, tasty breakfast. And I don't want to be bothered sometimes with all this. So I think initially we were maybe tinted a bit too much on talking about talking about the mission constantly and not talking about taste and health enough. And today we talk about taste, then health, and then sustainability. So you gotta meet consumers where they are. When you're busy and you got two kids running around throwing things, sometimes you don't want a speech on climate change. You just want a quick omelet that your kids will enjoy.
I think it also could be difficult sometimes when you have these really big goals to explain how making a simple choice like switching out your egg can actually tie back to that larger goal for the consumer.
For sure. And I think in the beginning, when you're talking about this big, sometimes amorphous goal of making the food system more just, it can feel a bit out of reach. But if you come down to the lives of the consumer and you're just trying to give them a healthier breakfast, and oh, by the way, they can be a part of something larger, I think that's a more effective way to communicate it.
Now, thinking about taste and talking about that a little bit more, you are using some really amazing food technology in the egg product as well as your meat launches that are upcoming. And so how do you kind of talk about the technology you're using to consumers in a way that says, hey, this is really new and different and not like anything you've had before, but at the same time isn't scary or Frankenfood sort of esque?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you how we talk about egg and then meat and how we go about that. So we made an egg from a plant. There are hundreds of thousands of species of plants all around the world: beans, grains, legumes. You've heard of them. Most of them you haven't heard of. And we found a bean called the mung bean that has a protein inside of it that makes a better egg. It makes a better egg because it has 69% less saturated fat, makes a better egg because it's entirely free of cholesterol, makes a better egg because it uses a whole lot land, water, and carbon emissions. And we figured out a way to remove that protein and mix it with some other non-GMO ingredients, and you got your omelet in the morning. So that's how we talk about egg. So you heard even in that we talked about the protein. We didn't hide that it's a protein. We're not using the whole bean. We talked about how we separate it from the bean. What I often don't talk about is, okay, we're using machines called decanting centrifuges, and what speed are the centrifuges running at? So
I've been to your office, Josh. It's pretty impressive. I think I did not have the right degrees to understand everything that was going on, but it's a little more complicated than that.
but you gotta. It's this balance of being really transparent about it, but just saying in ways that an everyday person can understand. On the meat side, we make real meat that doesn't require the slaughter of an animal. So not plant-based meat, but real chicken, beef, and pork that doesn't require slaughtering an animal. We start with a cell that we can get from an egg or a cell bank. We identify vitamins and minerals in the same way that an animal would eat soy and corn. Our cells need to do that. And then we make meat in this big stainless steel vessel called a bioreactor. And at the end of the day, it tastes really good and it's safer. Now, every once in a while, a consumer is going to hear that explanation and think, that sounds awfully bizarre, and maybe they might not want it. And I think with the good meat side, that's okay. I think not every person out there needs to be okay with it, but our target market needs to be okay with it. And we have found on the meat side, if you're under the age of 25, you don't really care if your meat is made in a giant stainless steel vessel. So as long as it tastes really good and it is better for the world. Over the age of 25, you got a few more questions. So that is, those explanations sort of are indicative of how we quickly try to communicate what we're doing on both sides.
Well, switching gears a little bit, we were joking before we started chatting about how to introduce you. And I think that really speaks to the fact that the Eat Just brand and the Josh Tetrick brand have become so intertwined over the years. I'm just wondering how you've had to evolve as a leader to grow in tandem with the brand at the same time.
Yeah, there are a few things. I mean, one is, you realize that all the decisions that are made every single day, whether it's how we communicate or, a new technology that we're trying out, a new formulation that we're working on, if I attempt to be involved in every one of those things, then very few of them will get done effectively because I'm a single human being and I also don't have the deep expertise in every single one of those areas. But I do need to be very involved because I want to make sure that everyone is very aligned on what the mission is. And I do have particular points of views on all those things. So I've had to try to find the right balance of getting really involved in some things and stepping back on other things. And the most important way you do that is hire really smart, driven people, whether that is on the comms side or the research and development side or the sales side. When you do that and you feel really aligned with them, you can really let it rip. And I really see myself like externally, in doing things like this, if I can be a tool to help us, I'm down. I'm ready to do it. I have no, if me being in the public eye a little bit more helps, let's go. If it doesn't, no worries. I got a lot of stuff to do. So that's how I come to think of it now.
But the brand has grown, I feel like a lot of the marketing was around you in the beginning, and now you guys just launched a new campaign that's really creative and focuses, solely on the consumer and how the products fit into their life.
Yeah. And I think it's been a transition too. Today we're in 33,000 points of distribution. So you can go pick up Just Egg at a Birmingham, Alabama Walmart, at a Whole Foods in San Francisco, at a cafe in Detroit, at ShopRite in Philadelphia. So we have such broad distribution also in Canada, Korea, elsewhere. in over 1.3 million households, that, we got to talk to the consumer, and the consumer cares a whole lot more about, is it tasting good and is it healthy for me, than they do, my personal story, and where I went to school and why I decided to found the company. Some of them care about that, but they care a whole lot more about, is the damn omelet tasty? Can I afford it? Does my kid like it?
Well, pulling a little bit more from those leadership skills you've developed, for a company pursuing transformative change like Just, how do you advise going about these goals? Did you, looking back, do you think it's better to start small and work your way up, or do you kind of just go at it head on right from the start?
Yeah, I would have done it differently. So I think you have three choices. Choice one is definitely not the right choice. It's just think very small and do very sequent small things. That's not for the kind of company that we're doing. So we can't do that one, and that was never an option for me. Choice number two is have a big mission and right away try to do everything, and that's what we tried to do in the beginning. And I'm so animated as my team around accomplishing this big mission. It's hard to hold us back from wanting to take big steps and wanting to sell to more people and to launch more products. But it ended up being a mistake, because there's a third choice that's even better, and it's to have a really big mission that's all encompassing, but realize that sequencing things actually increases the probability that you achieve the bigger thing. So not going in thousands of points of distributions of Walmart right away, but starting in Whole Foods, just as an example. So if someone would have told me that back in the day, I would have said, you don't know me, you don't know my ambition, you don't know how much my team cares. We should go for the Walmart consumer right this moment. We should launch in Korea right this moment. We should launch in China right this moment. And it's not to say you shouldn't eventually, but you build a foundation. And building that foundation just increases the probability that you can succeed long term, which is, at the end of the day, all we really care about.
And kind of as a follow up to that, when you think about the sequencing and that you have this big goal in the end, do you advise, communicating all of that to consumers up from the start? What about shareholders? How do you kind of think about that brand and communication strategy and how that ties into the growth plan?
Yeah, I think you always gotta, even if it wasn't effective to communicate it from the start, I just don't think I would have any fun if we couldn't always just say that. We have to be able to say the reason why we're doing what we're doing is this food system is not really working for us, and we need to figure out a way to eat lots of meat and eggs in a way that's causing less harm, right? That is a bit more kind, that is using less resources. It's reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. So even if that wasn't effective to say, we still got to say it. So we say that to consumers, to investors, to employees, to my 5-year-old golden retriever. Everyone hears it. And that's definitely been consistent since day one until now.
Well, thinking about those big statements, from the very beginning, I remember there was this period where the company had talked about changing the food system, and particularly had been talking about the egg product, but you didn't have a product in market yet that was, focused just on the egg. You had condiments and cookie doughs, I believe. So during those days, how did the brand you had created help the company get through on what the promise was to come? And, looking at that a step further, how far do you think brand alone can take a company?
I think doing those other products. So we only did those other products because we couldn't figure out a way to make an egg from a plant. If I could have figured out how to do that sooner, we would have done that first, but it just took way longer and was a whole lot more expensive and harder than I thought it was going to be. I think it helped us sharpen our thoughts on go to market. I think one of the biggest ones was just because a buyer, for example, at Walmart might be open to it. I'm just using Walmart as an example. Doesn't mean it's time for the Walmart consumer. That building a foundation first and then ultimately going into the world's largest retail and sequencing it in that way can make a lot more sense. So we learned a lot about sequencing. We learned a lot about why consumers are buying things, and it's not primarily because of this big mission. It's because it's tasty and it makes them feel good about it, as opposed to this big highfalutin mission that I'm talking about. That's a nice thing, but that's not like the thing they're thinking about is they're spreading something on their sandwich or they're scrambling up some eggs. So those were important lessons for us. There was a second part of your question. I don't think I
Well,
fully answered.
the part was, at what point we see a lot of these food tech companies, right? And they have these big goals. They
Yeah,
have these brands they build. How
yeah.
far do you think brand can carry
Oh,
you
yeah,
before you need to like put a
yeah,
product out there?
yeah. I think the way I think about brand now is I think you can have a phenomenal product, taste, texture, smell, cost, and all that. But because some of these things, an egg from a plant, real meat without needing to slaughter an animal, they're kind of different, right? These are not like everyday things that were around, 20 years ago. I think having a brand is necessary. It's just not enough. You have to have the product that lives up to the promise after it. So instead of saying it's all about the brand or it's all about the product, we think you just have to have a really solid mix of both. And in order to figure out a way to move this big, slumbering, unkind, silly, irrational food system to a better place, you got to be communicating. People need to feel deeply connected to this, and it has to taste good. It has to last. It has to have proper shelf life. It has to do all those things that consumers expect, or it's not gonna have the big impact that you want.
And speaking of that big impact, you are developing products and a brand that not only needs to work in the US, but needs to work in countries around the world and in different channels. And so, what's your advice on how to judge if your company and brand can support that level of growth, or if you need to refine things first?
Yeah, I'd go back to the sequence approach. So if someone would have told me 9 years ago, hey, you should get US set up before you launch in, Korea, I would have said, again, you don't know me, you don't know what I'm capable of, you don't know how smart and capable my team is. And today I would say, get yourself set up in your home market first. Make sure everything is working right. Make sure the supply chain is working right. Make sure you understand how to communicate the brand. Make sure you're delivering product on time and on full. Make sure you understand your consumer. Make sure that you understand how to effectively spend a dollar in marketing and communication, and then think about going to a new market. That's the advice I would give. I'm sure smart people gave me that advice back in the day, but I probably was too arrogant to listen 9 years ago.
How do you kind of go about setting up your brand though, so that it can extend into those markets? Like, do you even think companies should start to think that way, or nail down your home market? Don't even think beyond that until you're ready to go further.
I think with us, we're trying to build a brand where 99% of what we're doing applies everywhere. Like, are human beings a bit different in Seoul and Shanghai and Paris and London and Toronto and Rio? Yeah, a little bit different. But there's a lot more about them that are the same. Human beings, no matter where they are today or 1,000 years ago, like good tasting food. Generally, they like to feel good about the food that they're eating, whether that's from a health perspective or a wider perspective, and they like to be able to afford it. And I think building a brand around those three pillars works no matter where we're selling. And yeah, do we make country tweaks? We do. But I think building a brand where the foundation remains consistent makes it a little bit easier to go to new places.
Now, with that geographic expansion, you're doing, this really unique business strategy of developing these deep partnerships with everyone from distributors to food producers to chefs to food service locations. How do you make sure everyone sort of down that line is on board with the brand and mission? Um, and knows the right talking points, knows what the company stands for, and kind of avoid that game of telephone that sometimes results in a watered down messaging by the time it reaches the consumer.
Yeah, it the first thing is recognizing there's a brand, um, the idea, the aesthetic, the vibe, the energy, the meaning behind it, and then how it's executed. And a lot of the same people that are sort of building the energy of the brand, including me, are not the people that are executing all of the little nuances of how it shows up in the market. And I didn't get that at first. And today we really work hard to make sure all the partners are heavily educated on what we are and what we're not. So we do lots of training sessions. We try to automate as much as we possibly can. We build out a site called selljustegg.com that goes over all the different talking points, images you should choose, things you should emphasize, things that aren't quite as effective. But generally, it's having the understanding that operationalizing the brand is much harder than you think it is. And making sure that you have the right team to be able to do that at headquarters and in market. Again, something I had no idea about when I started the company on a couch in Southern California 9.5 years ago.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for taking us through a little bit of your journey with the company and with these amazing goals and speaking with me today.
Thanks. Good to be with you.